So I guess I'm going to get started here. My name is Alex Turner. I'm a program manager on the Visual Studio Languages team. And this is a talk on XML as well as Visual Basic, specifically the features in the latest version of Visual Basic, VB 2008, that make XML really nice to use. Some of the features we have that layer over the XML support we have in .NET to make XML really awesome. And to start off, I just want to set some context, but I probably don't have to explain to you why XML is so important for web scenarios. As you know, when you're coding on the web, either in Silverlight or sort of backend on the server, data often comes to you as XML. You're going to get data, let's say, from some sort of XML web service. You're going to call out to Flickr or Twitter, Amazon or Dig or something like that. And you're going to get back data, either from an RSS feed, some sort of REST API, but it'll come back to you most probably as XML. You might also have XML data files on your server. Maybe you have a content management system, and you're storing XML files for articles or posts. And then when you actually go to show them to the user, you do some sort of processing to produce what the user actually sees. And as it turns out, what the user actually sees on the web is often also XML. You have XHTML, obviously, if you're targeting the browser directly. If you're using Flex, you might have MXML. If you're targeting Silverlight, you're going to have XAML, because XAML is the markup language that Silverlight uses. And all of these are other forms of XML, but they're a different flavor of XML than the source data that you came with. And so you need to do some sort of transformation to get from point A to point B. And so today on the web, when you're doing that kind of transformation, the two most common options are either XSLT or XQuery, the traditional languages for doing querying and transformation over XML. But on the .NET platform, as of .NET 3.5, we now have another option. And available to you in both Visual Basic and C# called Link to XML. Link was the technology we introduced there for language integrated query. That's what it stands for. And it lets you have this rich query experience directly built into your programming language, experiences over objects, over databases, but also over XML. And so what you can use Link to XML for is actually this very thing, to do these transformations on the web. And so that's what I'm going to be showing today. We're going to take one path through here, basically going to start processing data from an XML web service. I'm going to pull data from Flickr. We're going to be generating a dynamic Silverlight UI, and so we're going to need to turn that Flickr data into XAML. And then I'm going to actually use Link to XML to do this processing. And not just Link to XML, but I'm going to specifically use the features of VB that layer over Link to XML that make Link to XML a really great experience inside Visual Basic. And so with that, we only have 20 minutes to do this, so I'm going to jump in and get started right away. And so here you see we have a simple Silverlight application. Nothing special I have here. It's a label up top. I have a text box where you can enter a Flickr tag, and there's a button the user is going to click. And then when they click the button, the images are going to appear down here. I don't know if you guys have seen Silverlight demos before. I'm going to spare you some sort of spinning carousel where the images go around in a circle, because it's probably everyone's favorite Flickr demo, but Silverlight demo. But basically, the image is just going to show up there, and for simplicity, we'll just put them in a list, and we'll see how it comes out. And in case you haven't seen Silverlight markup before, this is basically down here what produces the stuff up there. And the root node is a user control tag. This is really just XML. This is the XAML markup. And as I scroll down, I see, OK, I have user control. I have some grid definitions that would have been generated for me in Expression Blend to figure out the layout. I have a gradient here to figure out what the background color is doing. But then down here, I have my controls. So I have a text block, which is saying the Flickr tag up here. A text box called tag text box. Sorry, that's where the user is going to actually enter their text. And my button, which the user is going to click on. This is fetch images. And when I'm done, what I want my button to do is populate this stack panel node. So I want to fill this up and put image tags in there to actually say, OK, for each image, I'm going to have an image tag, perhaps a text block tag to say what the name of the image is. And so I want to be dynamically filling in this UI, and I'm going to do it from my VB source code. And so if I actually just go here, I can see at the end of my button, there's already an event handler hooked up here for the click event. And so I can right-click and navigate directly in there. And I've pre-populated this so to save some time with code that's actually already going to go out and do this web request to Flickr. And so I have up here the API URL that I'd have to call out to Flickr to get the photos that go with a given tag. And if I scroll to the right, you see that I've parameterized this, so I can sub in a value here, the exact templated value the user wants, the tags that they want me to retrieve. And I'm just going to go through and do a request here, sub in their user tag. get the URI, and then make an asynchronous request for that data. And this isn't that important, but I'm just going to sort of go through this, and we'll talk about specifically the XML transforms. And so I make those requests, I come back here, and what I get back as a result in my completed event is the XML stream. This is going to be the stream of data that I actually want to process, that I want to pull apart and transform into XAML. And just to see what's going on here, I'm going to say, well, take this XML stream and actually pull the data from it into memory, put it into a link to XML XDocument object that I can then further manipulate. So I'm going to say dim.doc equals xdocument.load, and I'm going to pass it the XML stream. And just to make sure everything's working right so far, I'll put a breakpoint there and run it. We'll see what our app is doing. I can go here and type MIX09, click Fetch Images, and then we made the web request, got back, our breakpoint was hit. And if I hover over doc, I can see that the text that's actually inside the X document looks like what we expect. It looks like RSS, and I see some namespaces after that. I'm actually going to drill in here, pull down this magnifying glass, and click XML Visualizer. And what I see here is a preview of the XML. And I know it might be a little bit small for those in the back, but basically this is the XML that came back from the RSS feed, from Flickr's RSS feed. And up top, we see what we expect. OK, there's an RSS node. Inside that, there's a channel node. And then inside the channel node, there's going to be a set of item nodes. And each of these item nodes represents one of the images that we care about. And specifically, within the item node, the data we care about is down here. So media:content. So content tag in the media namespace, the media namespace prefix we have specified. And so here's the URL for the image that we're actually going to want to pull. And down here next to media title, this is the actual title. This is the text that we would want to display next to the image. And so these are the two pieces of content we care about, media content and media title. And we want to distill this XML we got back from Flickr down to those two things. And so if I go scroll back up just quickly before we leave here, you'll notice that the media namespace prefix is defined up here at the top. So media namespace is this Yahoo namespace here, search.yahoo.com/MRSS. But there's actually no namespace defined for RSS and channel and all the other nodes we're going to go through to get there. And so that's because RSS puts its nodes in the default namespace. There's not a specific namespace that shows up for RSS. And so those are going to be the two namespaces that we end up caring about. We care about the empty namespace for getting the RSS and getting through that. And we also care about the media namespace because we want to pull in the data that's tagged media:content and media:title. OK. And so we now see that I have my document. I have my XML loaded. And so the thing I want to do is do my query. I want to do my transform to actually pull the XML out. The one thing I'm going to do before that, though, just to make my life a little bit easier along the way, is let VB know the shape of the XML that I expect to be seeing, the shape that I expect to get back from Flickr when I do this request. And the way you do this, basically is to provide to VB the XML schemas, the XSD files that tell it this is the shape of the XML I expect to see for the various namespaces I'm going to be consuming. And I could have an XSD. Maybe I would have already had one, or I put one together manually. But in this case, I'm just going out to an API. I don't want to have to hunt and peck for like, well, here's the RSS schema, and then I have to go find Yahoo's schema for their extensions to RSS. I'd really like to just say, hey, I want to infer a schema from the data that I have. And so a new feature actually in VS 2008 SP1 lets you do just that. So what I'm going to do to show you that, I'm going to copy this Flickr URL, the one that we've been using to make the requests. And I can go here and add something new to my project. And if I scroll all the way down, I see there's an item for XML schema, but there's also an item for XML2 schema. And XML2 schema is what's going to infer a schema from some source XML that I give it. Give this a name here. I'm going to call it Flickr response. And I now see it's asking for some XML documents that it can chew through and figure out a schema for. And so I'm going to say here, add from web, and give it that URL. I'm going to go in and just give a sample tag here. So I'm going to replace the parameter with MIX09. Hit OK. It goes out, fetches that data, comes back. And now when I click OK, it's going to generate the schema for the namespaces that it found. And if I look here in Flickr response, it actually generated 4 schemas, you can see, Flickr response through Flickr response 3. If I look in the first one, I see, well, here's all the stuff that was in the default namespace. Here's RSS. Inside RSS is channel. Inside channel, we expect to have an unbounded number of items. And then within each item, there's a whole bunch of stuff. But then down here, we have specifically media content and media title referenced from the media namespace. And so this XSD that was generated here is exactly the kind of shape we expect to see for the XML file we're going to get back from the service. And so if we scroll up also, we see that this namespace, or this schema, is referencing another namespace. We see it's referencing the search.yahoo.com/MRSS namespace from another file, from another XSD. And if I pull that down, if I open up this XSD here, we see that's basically what's being defined here. Here's the content tag we care about with the 4 attributes, URL, type, height, and width, along with the title attribute, the title element that we care about. And so we now have described to VB the shape of everything that we expect to retrieve. And so now when I write my query, VB can actually help me out and make sure I'm writing a query that's actually valid, has a high likelihood to succeed at runtime. So I'm going to close these and go back to my VB source code. And I'm going to go up to the top, and then before I write my query, I'm now going to pull in those namespaces that we made an XSD for and tell it that in this module, I consider those namespaces to be in scope. And so you see I have, for Visual Basic, I've imported 2 .NET namespaces to pull in classes for .NET. But I'm also able to use the imports keyword to pull in XML namespaces. You see here's the Microsoft.NET namespace, the System.NET namespace, along with my application namespace. But up here, there's, in brackets, the XML namespace. And this is the feature that's going to let me actually pull in those XSDs that I defined. And so I'm going to say here, bracket, XML namespace. I hit equals. And actually, we just see one. I have to move these over into my Silverlight project first. And now we see basically the 4 namespaces that we inferred, the 4 XSDs, each describing a different namespace with a different URI. And what I want, specifically, the one I care most about, again, is that media namespace. And so I'm going to go back and define specifically, I care about the media namespace. And I'm going to say media equals this search Yahoo MRSS namespace. And I've now pulled in that namespace. And media colon in my file is now going to mean that specific namespace. And another thing I want to pull in, because I want to navigate through it, I also want to pull in that default RSS namespace. But remember that RSS wasn't actually in a namespace in the XML file we looked at. It was just sort of loose tags, RSS, channel, and so on. And there was no overriding default namespace defined. But what I can do, so I can refer to it easily, I can give it my own namespace. So I'm going to call the namespace RSS. I'm going to say equals here. And then I'm going to say, when I mention RSS in my document, in my VB code, I actually mean the default namespace, this empty quotes representing the empty namespace. And so I'm going to select that. And OK, and now I've pulled in the 2 XML namespaces that I actually care about, the media namespace and the RSS namespace. But there's actually one more namespace that I care about, and that's the namespace of my target, the XAML code that I'm going to be producing. If I go back to my page.xaml here, and I go back up to the top, you see that, well, the root node here is a user control, but it actually specifies its own XML namespace. So when you specify XAML markup, it's in the schema's Microsoft Client 2007 namespace. And so really, all I have to do now, if I want to start generating nodes into this namespace, as Silverlight will expect, is to copy this, go back to my source code here, say imports, and paste that in. And you notice I don't actually have a colon here. And so what I'm saying is that whenever in this code you see XML elements that are going to be without a namespace, I'm actually talking about that default XAML namespace. And so now I have the 3 namespaces I care about, and I can go and I can write my query. So I'm going to come back down here. And we have our XML document. So I'm going to say now dim images equals. And now I'm going to write my link query. And if you've never seen link before, think of something like SQL or actually like XQuery, which it's pretty similar to. It's a query language where I can use from and where and select and those kind of operations to filter through my in-memory data. And so what I'm going to say here is from image, we'll call each one an image, in. And then I'm going to start from doc. Doc represents the X document that I have. But when I hit dot, I see, well, stuff that I would expect. This is an X document. It's a real .NET class. I see a bunch of methods. But at the top, I also see XML properties. There's one here that says ... and then angle brackets for the descendants property. And there's one here that's the elements property. And if you've used xquery before, this should look kind of familiar. These are basically the equivalent of the descendants and the elements axes in xquery. I can start now pulling apart the xdocument XML data that I have along these different axes. If I was using descendants, I would say, find me all XML nodes anywhere in my XML tree that match that name. And specifically for elements, I'm saying, well, only look through my direct children for something with that name. And so to be a little more efficient, we're going to use the elements property and dig through. And I see now, once I hit angle bracket, that a list of the nodes that are known about that could occur at the top level according to my XSDs now shows up in IntelliSense. And I have little question marks next to it because it doesn't quite know which one I'm talking about yet. And so if I go down now and say, OK, well, I care about RSS. That's the node that I cared about. We put in the RSS namespace here so we could talk about it. I say dot again, angle. And now I see just one node, RSS channel. And it has a little check mark because it says now that it knows that the parent is the RSS node, it knows exactly what the children could actually be. So I'm going to dig through and say, yes, I want to go into the channel node inside there. I want to go into the item nodes that are in there. And then for each item node, I want to pull out this one that I care about, media content. That's the important one to me. And so I'm going to select that, go to the next line, and that's it. Now, basically, I've selected out all the media content nodes that I care about. And I was able to do so in a way that helped me along, because I told VB about the XML namespaces that I was going to use. And so now I want to select out those XAML nodes. I want to select out the image tags and the various things I'm going to use to dump into my image panel to actually show a scrollable image list. And so I could figure out this out here, but the easiest way for me to do this is actually just to go back to the XAML and prototype what I actually want to insert. And so I'm going to scroll back down here to Stack Panel. And to save a bit of time, because time's a bit short here, I'm going to just insert this directly. And what this code is doing is I'm saying, OK, well, inside my stack panel, put another stack panel, a horizontal stack panel that has two things. One, an image that it's going to load from Flickr, and another one being a text block that just says, in this case, image title. We'll see if the image actually loads here in a bit. Well, we'll give it a second. But basically, yeah, there we go. You see Scott Goo. We're basically pulling in now the image that we care about plus a text block. And this is going to be the template that I want to use for each of the images that appear. I want to put a whole set of these down in my scrollable area. And so to do this, I'm going to take this now, cut the stack panel, go back into my code, and now after saying from so-and-so, select, I can select directly this XML that I want. And you see, VB completely understands what's going on here. It's colorized it. It knows what's an element, what's an attribute, what's a value, and so on. And it understands that the stack panel matches the /stack panel. It knows the structure of my code. If I actually look and hover over images to see what's being produced, this is going to be a collection of X element objects. And so this is all strongly typed. This isn't like a string where it's shoving data in and it's just going to do some black magic. This is actually a real X element node in our XML DOM. But I'm able to specify it in a way that feels almost exactly like XML, real XML. In fact, I was able to copy and paste the XML directly into my code. And so the one change we obviously have to make here, though, is to template this data, because we don't want to load this specific stuff every time. So I'm going to remove this stuff here from the source. Oops. And say specifically here, OK, what source do we want? Well, we want to pull out the URL attribute from that image tag. So I'm going to say here something that should look familiar if you guys have done ASP.NET or any other template languages for XML. And I'm going to escape out of the XML, basically back into VB source code. And now that I'm there, I have full access to the stuff that's in scope. I can say img dot. And I see the same XML properties, but I also see an additional one for the attribute axis. And when I hit at, I see just the elements that I know are actually in that attribute axis. And so I can go just to here, image.url. And then I can do the same thing for the title. But image, the title is not actually an attribute of this. If we remember, it was in a sibling element next to the media content node. But luckily, because again, this is strongly typed, I'm able to navigate fully around my XML tree. I can say image.parent, navigate up a level, and then use XML properties to dig back down and get the media title element, and then pull out its value, the contents of the tag. And that's it. If I come down here, I'm going to put in a little bit of code down here that actually just goes through and adds it to the XML, to the XAML that I have. I'm not going to explain it because we're running a bit short on time. And I'll run this. If all goes according to plan, I'll be able to type in MIX09 up here, push fetch images, and then we see that all the titles loaded, and then gradually as the internet connection cooperates, we'll be able to get the images also. And so that's it. That's my demo. I hope you guys got a quick taste here. This is a very, very small amount of what you can actually do with link to XML. But if you are actually more interested now, you can check out, if you haven't already, you can download Visual Web Developer Express, make Silverlight apps in Visual Basic for free. You can poke around Silverlight, ASP.NET, ASP.NET MVC, all that good stuff. For link to XML, we also have a quick start specifically for Silverlight up on Silverlight.net. Shows way more than I showed about link to XML. You can do all sorts of rich stuff, grouping, ordering, all the kind of stuff you expect in languages like SQL. And also the VB Team blog, where there's all sorts of great goodness posted about Visual Basic, well beyond Silverlight. And that's it. So thanks for coming. I guess we don't really have time for questions now, but if you want, I'm going to be in the third place lounge area for the next few hours. So come by, or I'll talk to you after the session. Thanks.